بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. ولما برزوا لجالوت وجنوده قالوا ربنا أفرغ علينا صبرا وثبت أقدامنا وانصرنا على القوم الكافرين. فهزموهم بإذن الله وقتل داود جالوت وآتاه الله الملك والحكمة وعلمه مما يشاء ولولا دفع الله الناس بعضهم ببعض لفسدت الأرض ولكن الله ذو فضل على العالمين. تلك آيات الله نتلوها عليك بالحق تلك آيات الله نتلوها عليك بالحق وإنك لمن المرسلين. الله أكبر. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. والسماء والطارق وما أدراك ما الطارق النجم الثاقب إن كل نفس لما عليها حافظ. فلينظر الإنسان مما خلق. خلق من ماء دافق يخرج من بين الصلب والترائب إنه على رجعه لقادر. والسماء والطارق وما أدراك ما الطارق وما أدراك ما الطارق النجم الثاقب إن كل نفس لما عليها حافظ. صدق الله العلي العظيم. صلوا.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. إذا الشمس كورت وإذا النجوم انكدرت وإذا الجبال سيرت وإذا العشار عطلت وإذا الوحوش حشرت وإذا البحار سجرت وإذا النفوس زوجت وإذا الموءودة سئلت بأي ذنب قتلت. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. إذا الشمس كورت وإذا النجوم انكدرت وإذا الجبال سيرت وإذا العشار عطلت وإذا الوحوش حشرت وإذا البحار سجرت وإذا النفوس زوجت وإذا النفوس زوجت وإذا الموءودة سئلت بأي ذنب قتلت. وإذا الصحف نشرت وإذا السماء كشطت وإذا الجحيم سعرت وإذا الجنة أزلفت علمت نفس ما أحضرت. فلا أقسم بالخنس الجوار الكنس والليل إذا عسعس والصبح وما صاحبكم بمجنون ولقد رآه بالأفق المبين وما هو على الغيب بضنين وما هو بقول شيطان رجيم فأين تذهبون إن هو إلا ذكر للعالمين لمن شاء منكم أن يستقيم وما تشاءون إلا أن يشاء الله رب العالمين صدق الله العلي العظيم صلوات.
Please recite another salawat for Brother Mahdi and Brother Alisina. So today we started a little earlier because Maghrib is at 8:15 inshallah. A lot of people probably just out of habit might come later because the week before we started 7:30. So we are extremely delighted and honored that we have the respected brother Jalal Moughania with us tonight and tomorrow night inshallah. Brother Jalal is an international lawyer, author and lecturer. He has authored numerous books about Imam Hussein, Imam Ali, Bibi Fatima. He's also the co-author of The Pope Meets Ayatollah. So inshallah we will benefit from his lectures tonight and tomorrow night. Without further ado, please join me in welcoming Jalal Moughania to the member with a loud salawat.
صلوا على محمد وآل محمد. أعيدوا الصلاة على محمد وآل محمد. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم، والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا ونبينا وحبيب قلوبنا أبي القاسم المصطفى محمد وعلى آل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين. اللهم صل. الحمد لله رب العالمين، الحمد لله الذي جعلنا من المتمسكين بولاية سيدي ومولاي علي بن أبي طالب، والحمد لله الذي هدانا لهذا وما كنا لنهتدي لولا أن هدانا الله. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقه قولي. In the name of Allah, the most beneficent, the most merciful, we ask Allah to again send His greatest peace and blessings upon Muhammad wa Ali Muhammad. We praise Allah for all the blessings He has given us, and the greatest blessing being that He allowed us to be of the ones who remain steadfast, dedicated, and loyal on the path of our Master after the Prophet, the commander of the faithful, the prince of the believers, the protector of the Prophet and his message, Al-Imam Ali ibn Abi Talib alayhi salam. We praise Allah for this blessing and every blessing, for without Allah, we would have nothing. Assalamu alaikum, my dear respected elders, my dear respected brothers, my dear respected sisters, wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Firstly, I would like to share a word of thanks and gratitude to you all for allowing me to participate with you in continuing the commemoration of Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam and his holy family, the survivors of Karbala, as we make our way towards the day of the Arba'een. These days that we're building up towards the day of Arba'een, the 40th day of commemoration, after the day of Ashura, after the massacre at Karbala, after the greatest tragedy that the world has ever seen, the tragedy of Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam, the one that his brother Imam al-Hasan alayhi salam would describe as La yawma ka yawmika ya Aba Abdullah. There is no day like your day, O Aba Abdullah. So for me, coming before you all, it is an honor, it is a privilege. I thank you. I'm grateful to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for you allowing me to be of service with you all in the commemoration of Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam. When we're looking and trying to understand some of the most fundamental concepts, ideas, and more importantly, I would say doctrines that we derive from the day of Ashura, from the movement of Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam, in understanding what was Karbala all about. And altogether what we see is when we're trying to understand the doctrines of the day of Ashura, we see them as the doctrines of Islam. There's a book that I'm basing these two lectures on tonight. And this book, I brought it with me. I brought the English translation with me. It's called Understanding Karbala. And the reason why I bring this book with me, which is a book by the late Grand Ayatollah Sayyid Muhammad Sa'id al-Hakim rahmatullah alayh, who passed away 3 years ago. This late marja, for those of you who know him or don't know him, just a little bit about him. He was an individual, like many of our religious scholarship and religious leadership, was so dedicated to the service of Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam, and constantly encouraged people in any which way possible to remember Abu Abdullah al-Hussein, to walk in the day of Arba'een, to walk from Najaf and to Karbala and from all over the world, would emphasize the commemoration of Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam and al-Sha'air al-Husayniyah, the rituals of Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam, in all languages, in all cultures, wherever you are in the world. Whether you're in the Middle East, you're in South Asia, you're in West Asia, you're in Europe, you're in America, wherever you are in the world, don't disconnect from the love language of Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam. A language of understanding, a language of connection, that connection which ultimately takes us to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Now, the late Grand Ayatollah Sayyid Muhammad Sa'id al-Hakim, he faced a lot of trouble. He faced a lot of turmoil, a lot of sacrifice. He was one of the maraja, one of those great scholars that under the tyrannical Ba'athist regime of Saddam Hussein, he was imprisoned for several years. He and his family members were tortured. He and his family members faced some of the most heinous crimes by the Ba'athist regime. Many of their family members were killed. Many of their family members were executed, assassinated. Some were exiled. They faced a lot. But through all the tragedies that they faced, they held on to the message of Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam. So I'm sharing with you tonight, inshallah, the two lectures, tonight and tomorrow night, based on this book, that even if you don't have access to the original Arabic, alhamdulillah, the English is translated. For those who are interested in the original Arabic, the book is called Faja'atul Taf. In English, it's Understanding Karbala. You can find it online. You can order off of Amazon and engage further. Now, why am I focusing so much in this introduction on our religious scholarship, the scholars, the jurists, and books? There is an emphasis that we have in our faith on education. There's an emphasis in our faith on scholarship. There's an emphasis in our faith on pursuing knowledge. And inshallah, I'm going to get into some more practical implementation on that and some of the practical tips on that tonight and tomorrow night. But I want us to know that from the minbar here, this blessed place, this beautiful center, mashallah, that you are all a part of, and I'm grateful to be a part of with you. We need to make sure that the knowledge that we're seeking doesn't stop at the person, the speaker, the scholar, whoever it is that's coming up on the minbar and speaking. That is excellent. And the Husayniyah and the Majalis al-Husayniyah need to continue. And you and I, we make them continue. You and I together, we make them continue. Al-Majlis al-Husayni isn't just about the speaker that's coming and speaking. It's about the attendance that's coming and engaging. Without the attendance, without you all, there is no majlis. Correct? You make this majlis possible. So, it doesn't stop though at us speaking and engaging just from here. Especially for the young men and the young women in the audience, we need to make it a culture for us, a culture of reading, a culture of education, a culture of seeking. Our religion, Islam, and our school of thought, that of Tashayyu', is a school of thought and is a religion that is so focused on what? You building an understanding. Not just accepting anything that's told to you. You build an understanding. You build an education. You build a foundation. Ahlul Bayt alayhim as-salam, when they were facing the ultimate necessary sacrifice that Imam al-Husayn alayhi salam would need to give his life in order to save the faith, in order to save Islam. What was Imam al-Husayn alayhi salam doing? What was he actually doing? He was, to many of us here today, the ability to say La ilaha illallah Muhammad Rasulullah, just that, the ability to say it in its true meaning, that's what Imam al-Husayn alayhi salam was sacrificing for. That's what Imam al-Husayn alayhi salam gave his life and everything that he could for, so that you and I can have what? Not just words, an understanding. So my dear brothers and sisters, if you want to build on this understanding, what I would highly recommend, whether it's this book that I've brought with me here tonight, that I'm basing my lectures on, the work of our scholars, the work of our scholarship, or any other book that will help you build a deeper understanding into Karbala and the movement of Imam al-Husayn alayhi salam. And I want to ask you all, and though it may be seen as a rhetorical question, I'm actually going to ask a question, and I wish for you to raise your hand if you can, or not raise your hand, based on the answer. Who here believes that they understand the movement of Imam al-Husayn alayhi salam and why he did what he did? Brothers and sisters, this is troubling. Who here does not understand the movement of Imam al-Husayn alayhi salam and why he did what he did? Okay, so maybe it's not the question that's an issue, it's the participation itself. I'm going to ask one more time, okay? Who here understands why Imam al-Husayn alayhi salam kharaj? Why did he leave? Why did Imam al-Husayn alayhi salam leave his home in Medina? Why did he leave Mecca? Why did Imam al-Husayn alayhi salam go to Iraq? Why is it that the poet from the 17th century would describe Imam al-Husayn alayhi salam through the poetry, إن كان دين محمد لم يستقم إلا بقتلي فيا سيوف خذيني? Why was that said? Do we know? Okay, no worries. I'll work on the participation that I had from the young brothers here in the front. MashaAllah. Al-Imam al-Husayn alayhi salam, his movement, and this is something that's so key to recognize and acknowledge. Is there a contradiction between the movement of Imam al-Husayn alayhi salam and what was done at Karbala? All the sacrifices, all the tragedy, the sacrifice of life. Is there a contradiction between Imam al-Husayn alayhi salam and what he did at Karbala and what was done before him with his brother Imam al-Hasan, with his father Imam Ali alayhi salam, and with his son Imam al-Sajjad alayhi salam after him, and the Imams after them? Is there a contradiction or no? What I would like to establish here tonight is by examining two doctrines that our scholars have understood from the movement of Ahlul Bayt alayhim salam, from the Holy Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa alihi to all the way to our awaited Imam al-Muntadhir al-Mahdi alayhi salam. All of them. There's two doctrines. One is called Hifz al-Din. The second is Hifz al-Dima. Hifz al-Din refers to the preservation of religion, of faith, to preserve Islam. The second is the preservation of blood, literally, which means the preservation of life. If you look and you see the movement of Ahlul Bayt alayhim salam, from the Prophet to the Imam, our living Imam, there's always what? These two considerations. So when people look at the movement of Ahlul Bayt and they see Imam al-Hasan and his peace treaty with Muawiyah, but they see Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam in his rising up against Yazid, is it a contradiction? Our scholars do what? They're able to show us that no, this isn't a contradiction. And instead, we need to understand, why did they do what they did? Why did Imam al-Hasan alayhi salam have a peace treaty with Muawiyah? Why did Imam Ali alayhi salam not fight against those who took his right? The first, the second, and the third caliphates. Why did Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam not give bay'ah to Yazid and would go from city to city and finally end up in Karbala? But even when he did that, the way he did it, there were still certain objectives that were at play, certain objectives as a foundation. Why did Imam Zayn al-Abidin alayhi salam not revolt against the Umayyads, even though Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam was killed in Karbala? All of these questions are extremely important. Why? Unless we build an understanding, at least a fundamental, foundational one, right? A basic one, of why did Ahlul Bayt do what they did? Why is our Imam al-Hujjah alayhi salam still in occultation? It goes back to these two fundamental doctrines, Hifz al-Din wa Hifz al-Dima. Now, are there certain objectives that will always be important? Absolutely. Like being against oppression, being against injustice, being with the oppressed, etc., etc. All of those things extremely important, things that Ahlul Bayt alayhim salam fulfilled. But we have to understand, why is it that, for example, Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam did the way he did, while Imam al-Hasan did the way he did? Is it a contradiction? No. Because they had fundamental principles that each and every single one of them, depending on the circumstances of their time, they were fulfilling. Depending on the situation and the context that they had at that time, they were addressing. Now, my dear brothers and sisters, when we're talking about these concepts, I don't want this to be something that is just abstract, conceptual, theoretical. It's very real. I want to examine a little bit more on the whole idea of Hifz al-Din wa Hifz al-Dima, the preservation of life and the preservation of faith. Let's take, for example, or let's take specifically the preservation of life. How important is each and every single person's life here? How sacred is the life of my brother, the life of my sister, the life of my elders? How sacred are those lives? And what does that mean for you and I? We're looking at it as Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam on the day of Ashura. The eve of Ashura, Imam al-Hussein is telling his companions and family members, escape in the night, save your lives. They only want my blood. To the very last moment, Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam was trying to reduce the human casualty within the necessary sacrifice, which was his own life. So Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam was trying to save people's lives. Even on the day of Ashura, Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam would urge the other side, don't have this battle. Don't have this battle. Don't shed my blood. I don't want you to enter hellfire because of me. Because of you shedding my blood. Don't you remember who I am? And Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam was doing ilqa al-hujjah, that he was telling them, who am I? Whose turban is this that I'm wearing? Whose sword is this that I'm holding? Whose robe is this that I'm wearing? Whose son am I? I'm the son of Fatima, I'm the son of Ali, I'm the grandson of Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wa. And he was providing all these proofs. Our scholars tell us there was an emphasis from the Imam on what? The preservation of life. Now, you and I, how sacred are our lives? And the Imam was focusing on making sure to reduce human casualty. But you and I, are we sanctifying our lives the way we should? Are we respecting our lives the way we should? Whether it's the person on your right or the person on your left, or your own self, do you know how valuable your life is? Our Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wa alihi, it is narrated that he said, the sanctity of the believer is greater than the sanctity of the Kaaba itself. The sanctity of the believer is greater than the sanctity of the Kaaba itself. So you and I, we need to really take a second to think hard. How do we look at ourselves and how do we look at everybody around us? Because the Prophet is telling you, the Imam is telling you, the Imam is showing you, your life is so important. Your life is so sacred. I'm going to do whatever I can to protect it, to preserve it, to save it. The Prophet is saying, you are more sacred than the Kaaba itself. I have a question, and hopefully I'll get some hands on this one. Another one. If someone was about to attack the Kaaba, and you are at the Kaaba, who has done Hajj before? Hajj? Umrah? MashaAllah. If you were at Hajj or you were at Umrah, and someone you know, in this hypothetical situation, you know the Kaaba is about to be attacked, and you can prevent the Kaaba from being attacked. You know that the Kaaba is about to be assaulted, and you know the Kaaba, you can prevent it from being assaulted. Imagine being in the position that Abdul Muttalib, the grandfather of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wa was standing at the Kaaba. Standing at the Kaaba in 570 AD. The year of the elephant, the year that the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wa was born. When the Kaaba was about to be attacked. And he stood in front of the Kaaba. And the whole army, the army of Abraha that was coming from East Africa, they were coming forward with elephants to attack the Kaaba. Imagine, it was like modern day tanks. And they told him, Abdul Muttalib, what are you going to do? You're one person. They were laughing at him. And Abdul Muttalib said, this house has a Lord who will protect it. And he prayed to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, Ya Allah, this is your house, we are your people, protect us. And subhanallah, one man's prayer, of course he wasn't any ordinary man, this was Abdul Muttalib, but one man's prayer saved the Kaaba. Now imagine you and I, in this hypothetical, we have the opportunity to protect the Kaaba, to honor the Kaaba, to prevent an attack on the Kaaba. Who here would protect the Kaaba? If you had the opportunity to protect the Kaaba, you're going to protect the Kaaba. MashaAllah. Alright, we're getting a little bit more participation. Let's go Albany. Alhamdulillah. This is, by the way, I want to tell you something. This participation, the majalis of Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam, they're not passive majalis. They're active majalis. The memory of Abu Abdullah al-Hussein alayhi salam needs to move us so that we can be better for each other and for ourselves. So inshallah, if we had the opportunity to protect the Kaaba, we would do what? We would protect the Kaaba. Now, if you and I know that Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wa has told us, it's narrated to us, that he said, the sanctity of the believer is greater than the sanctity of the Kaaba itself. How do you think you and I should jump at the opportunity to do what? To honor each other and honor ourselves. To protect each other and protect ourselves. It's narrated from Ahlul Bayt alayhim as-salam I believe the narration from Imam al-Sadiq alayhi salam, he says that the believer, one of the attributes of the believer is that other believers are safe from his or her tongue. Look at that small, very small thing. I'm not necessarily looking at for us protecting each other from physical altercations. At the very least, you and I, how do we honor each other? Do we remember each other in good ways? Do we remember each other in positive ways? You and I, when we're looking at our community and how to build a community, what kind of example do we set for each other? And more importantly, how do you see yourself? Because my dear brothers and sisters, if we do not honor ourselves, respect ourselves, and focus on ourselves and our own development, we're not going to see progress in our community. We're not going to see development in our community. We're not going to see positive movement in our community. The individual that wants to follow Ahlul Bayt alayhim as-salam, as our scholars tell us, is an individual that is looking at what? Is looking at what? Every single day needs to be better than the day before. When I'm going to sleep at night, what am I reflecting on? What happened throughout the day? When I'm waking up in the morning, I'm setting forth a plan so that this day is better than the day before. It's a movement. It's action. Based on what? Reflection. Our Holy Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam tells us, "At-tafakkur sa'a." 1 hour of reflection is greater or is worth as much as what? 70 years of worship. 70 years of worship. 1 hour. So perhaps you and I, in this 1 hour setting, that alhamdulillah, those who have organized this majlis, may Allah bless them and bless their families. 1 hour of sitting down and reflecting, truly active reflection, that could perhaps be the equivalent for you of a lifetime of worship. May Allah prolong the lives of all of our family members. But what is a lifetime going to be, a lifespan going to be? 70 years, 80 years, 90 years, 100 years, 110 years. 70 years. Now, by the way, the number 70, and not to go into the interpretation of the hadith, but linguistically, our scholars say that there's some reference in interpretation when the use of the word or the use of the number 70. And this one particularly I read when it came to Imam Ali alayhi salam specifically, when he gave the hadith, gave the narration. It's narrated from Imam Ali alayhi salam about al-mahmal al-hasan. Because we're talking about the way we engage with one another, we're talking about the way we treat one another, the way we look at one another. Imam Ali alayhi salam, it's narrated from him that a person, if you were to see a brother, a sister, in a suspicious situation, mawda' shubha, in a suspicious situation, how many excuses should you give them? How much benefit of the doubt should you give your believing brother or sister? It said that the Imam said, "Sab'ina mahmal." Give him or her 70 excuses before you jump to a negative conclusion about them, right? It's hard. It's hard for us. Sometimes when we look and we see one another, we can jump to conclusions very quickly. But the Imam is saying, if you want to observe this community that we're trying to develop as Ahlul Bayt alayhim as-salam, you should give your believing brother or sister 70 excuses. 70 benefits of the doubt. Our scholars, some provide an interpretation on this, that the use of the number 70 was what? Non-exhaustive. So basically it was such a number that nobody's going to reach that number. And that's why linguistically the Imam used that number, 70. And if you and I think about it, we're probably not going to reach that number. So whether it's our worship, and the reflection and connecting to the worship, and how great an hour of reflection can be, for ourselves, for our hearts, for our souls. Or it's looking at one another and seeing, how do I deal? How do I deal with the person to my right, the person to my left, my brother, my sister? If I see somebody in the majlis I haven't seen for a long time, if I see somebody in the community I haven't seen for a long time, what kind of thought do I have about them? This is all tied to what? The way we see ourselves and the way we see each other. Because we can't claim to be those following the path of Ahlul Bayt alayhim as-salam if we're not implementing and practicing their ethics. And the path of Ahlul Bayt alayhim as-salam started with the ethics of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa alihi. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad. The stories of the Prophet and his seerah are many. I'm going to mention one. Speaking of the ethics and how this ties to what? The movement of the Prophet, which was the movement of Ahlul Bayt. The Holy Prophet ﷺ was attacked frequently and consistently, especially in the early days of Islam. They say that the Prophet was walking a certain path, and he would walk this path every single day. And as he was walking this path, every time he passed by the specific house which an older woman lived in, as soon as she would see the Prophet walking outside of her home, she would open the door and start throwing trash at the Prophet. Every single day. So I want you to imagine the scene with me. The Prophet is walking this path, walking on the side of the road, minding his own business. This woman, every single time the Prophet came by, she took out her trash, but she threw it at the Prophet. And she would also meet him with a verbal assault, cursing him, saying trash things about him. One day, the Prophet is walking, and she doesn't come out. Imagine you and I, we would probably be relieved. No trash today, no issue today, walk on in peace. But the Prophet was concerned. Instead, the Prophet, instead of just going on his way, relieved, he was concerned. He knocked on the door, there was some family inside. He went inside the house, and he took it upon himself to serve the woman that would trash him on a daily basis. She was very sick at this point. When she came to her senses, hours later, realizing that the Prophet Muhammad, whom she was trashing on a daily basis, now is at her bedside, caring for her, she asked him, Muhammad, is that you? He said, yes, with his beautiful prophetic smile. Our Prophet Muhammad ﷺ was known for his beautiful smile. He was always, one of his characteristics was bashush, always smiling, always cheerful. She asked him, why? How? He replied with his beautiful prophetic smile, إِنَّمَا بُعِثْتُ لِأُتَمِّمَ مَكَارِمَ الْأَخْلَاقِ. I was sent to perfect the best of ethics, the best of manners, the best of human dealing, akhlaq. That's what our Prophet ﷺ was sent for. And on the day of Ashura, Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam was doing what? The movement of Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam was for what? To save that religion, that Islam, that makarim al-akhlaq. That no matter what, if we are to follow the path of Al-Hasan wal-Hussein, the Prophet described them, Al-Hasan wal-Hussein, imaman, qama aw qa'da. Al-Hasan wal-Hussein, my grandsons, they are two imams, whether they rise or they sit and settle. Both of them. When we're looking at them, and we're looking at Imam Ali, and Lady Fatima Zahra alayhi salam, and the Holy Prophet, peace and blessings be upon him. And why do I emphasize? I always emphasize all of them together. Because the movement was one. They were protecting Islam. If you were to ask, what is the most profound thing that the Holy Prophet Muhammad ever said, what would it be? What would it be? La ilaha illallah. La ilaha illallah. There is no God but Allah. Nothing's worthy of worship. Nothing, not only nothing exists, nothing could be worthy of worship other than Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. You and I as human beings, we're what? We're wired to have worship and dependency on something. But our choice is, what do we worship and what are we dependent on? So when I'm looking at what Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam did, he saved this religion. He saved this faith. And he made sure while he was doing that, he was saving and protecting life and emphasizing what the Prophet emphasized, which is what? This religion is a religion of akhlaq. There's a religion of human dealing, of ethics. And the individuals, these human beings that we've brought this religion to, you matter. And you have a sanctity. And you are important. And you are valuable. And that cannot be taken for granted. So I pray, my dear brothers and sisters, here tonight, in the blessings of Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam, young and old, you and I should be inspired to realize how much we actually matter. You and I should be inspired to realize that if you are here today, if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is giving you yet another opportunity to breathe, to fill your lungs with air, and to take another step forward, and to have another prayer, and to sleep another night, and to wake up another morning, and wake up another day, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is giving you this opportunity and telling you, you matter. Make your life matter. I know you matter. I've made sure that my prophets and the disciples of these prophets and the representatives of these prophets sent the message and preserved that message, that each and every one of us know we are servants of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and we matter. Our lives matter. This is the only opportunity that we have. You don't get another life. This life that we have right now, this is the only one you got. It's the only one you're gonna get. So what are you doing with this life? What are you doing with it? Are you actively being involved in your life? Or are you just passively letting this life take you by? How are you living this life? The next time somebody asks you, how's your day? Has anyone ever heard the response, same old, same old? Anyone ever hear the response, same old, same old? Okay. Does that sound like a life that we're really appreciating, we're grateful for, we're being present in, we're bringing ourselves towards, saying alhamdulillah and presenting ourselves every single day with that gratitude? Or does that sound like we're just being a little passive? Many of us come from experiences that would turn black hair white. Many of us come from tragedy. Many of us come from sacrifice. Many of us come from misfortune. I'll tell you just a small bit of my family's journey, and maybe you can relate to this. Maybe in the blessings of the remembrance of Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam, we can all take benefit and see how grateful we should be for the opportunity of life that we have before us, because our circumstances could be different. My grandparents, they came to the United States several decades ago, a few decades ago, late 70s. My grandparents were escaping war, maybe like some of your families. And the war was so intense in my home country of Lebanon. This was the late 70s during the civil war in Lebanon. Everybody was fighting everybody. My grandma describes the scene to me as she was trying to go from consulate to consulate, embassy to embassy, trying to get the paperwork in order, while my grandfather had already come here to the States trying to get the situation done. She was still in Lebanon, in Beirut, with 5 children, or 4 children at that time. And she would be literally dodging gunfire in a war zone just to get from one place to another to get the documentation that was needed so that she can get out of the country and protect her children. And when they finally came to the United States and they decided where they were going to be, mashallah, you all have a beautiful community here in Albany. When my grandparents were trying to decide where are they going to be, they were looking between two communities, Dearborn, Michigan and New York. And my grandmother describes to me that the reason why they ended up choosing Dearborn, Michigan at that time was because my grandfather heard of a sheikh, of a scholar, who was building a small community, building a mosque, a center, that was trying to protect and preserve the Shia Muslim identity, so that young men and women can grow up knowing what their faith is, knowing what Islam is all about, knowing what Ahlul Bayt alayhim salam were, and preserve the identity and preserve the basic teachings. So he made a decision when he left from Beirut, Lebanon, to the United States. He said, I'm not going to take a chance on going anywhere else. I'm going to go to this community. Why? Even though he wasn't necessarily the most religious man, he decided he wanted to protect the lives of his children. Not just the lives as in the safety. That one, they were leaving the country to protect their lives. Something maybe some of your families can relate to. But in addition to that, there was an emphasis on what? The preservation of the faith. And perhaps my grandfather didn't understand it at that time, or not necessarily didn't recognize it at that time, that he was perhaps following the two doctrines that our scholars understand from Ahlul Bayt alayhim salam in their very movement. The emphasis on what? Hafdh al-Din wa Hafdh al-Dima. Preservation of religion, preservation of faith, and preservation of life. Your life matters, your religion matters. Preserve your life and preserve your faith. Now, I look at it and I say, thank you, Jaddu, thank you, grandfather, for what you did. You made a good decision. Now the onus is on me, the responsibility is on me. I have a life, I have children. What do my children's lives look like? What does my life look like? What does my lifestyle look like? Am I honoring the life that they sacrificed, that they escaped the war zone to get to where I am today? Am I honoring that life? Am I honoring that faith? Or am I taking it for granted? You and I have an opportunity. You and I have an opportunity. The opportunity is simple. So long as Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala fills our lungs with air and allows us to take a deep breath, we have a responsibility but an opportunity. What kind of life do you want to live? What kind of man do you want to be? What kind of woman do you want to be? What kind of family do you want to build? What kind of community do you want to develop? Life is short. We don't got that much time. And it goes like in a blink. But the opportunity is ours. And it's here. Do we build on it? Do we take it? Or do we take it for granted? Inshallah, we'll continue tomorrow night and delving a little bit deeper into these two doctrines, the preservation of life, the preservation of faith, and bring it a little bit more together, especially within the theme of education, because I believe, inshallah, that's relevant and important for all of us. But before we end and we transition to Salah, which I believe is in a few minutes, I'd like to, with your permission, recite just some of the story from the day of Ashura, so that we can all take blessings in the majlis of Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam and recite the tragedy of Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam. With your permission, inshallah, we'll recite. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Now, my dear brothers and sisters, subhanallah, and this Muharram has been very interesting, because online people are being exposed more and more, and especially this year, and next year is probably going to be even more, to the expression in the majalis of Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam in so many different languages all over the world, especially in English. And what an honor it is that we have, that we are expressing the love of Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam in a language that perhaps our ancestors were not expecting us to speak. And a language that can perhaps bring more and more people closer to Ahlul Bayt alayhim salam, especially in the communities and the societies that we live here, that we live in. So, for those who may have a mother tongue of a different language, whether it's Farsi, it's Arabic, it's Urdu or others, those who are tuning in online, I think the language that we can all find in commonality is the language of English. Inshallah, I'm going to recite in that. And I ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to give us the tawfiq to bring the grief into our hearts over the tragedy of Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam, and perhaps let a tear from our eye fall. As Imam al-Sadiq alayhi salam, it was narrated that he said, the one who recites, and this is all relevant to all of us, not just myself as someone who's going to recite right now for the next few minutes, but the one who recites poetry and the story of Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam and makes 50 people cry, lahul jannah, he has paradise. The Imam continues, the one who recites over the tragedy of Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam and makes 30 people cry, he has paradise. He continues, the one who recites the tragedy of Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam and makes 20 people cry, he has paradise. Then he continues, 10 people cry, he has paradise. You see the theme. You see what's going on. He says, if you make one person cry, you have paradise. And he doesn't stop there. He says, the one who recites the tragedy of Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam and makes himself or herself cry, they have paradise. Then he ends the hadith by saying, the one who recites the tragedy of Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam to himself or herself and just has grief in their heart, they have paradise. So inshallah, my dear brothers and sisters, as we calm ourselves before prayer, let's recite a little bit from the story of Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam to perhaps shed some tears and bring our grief into our hearts as we remember Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam. If I tell you this tale of sorrow, will you lend me your hearts to borrow? Will you shed a tear for Hussein? Will you remember Zainab's pain? If I tell you this tale of sorrow, will you lend me your hearts to borrow? Will you shed a tear for Hussein? Will you remember Zainab's pain? And if we stay here tonight until tomorrow, will you bear this tale of sorrow? Listen here to Hussein's story, a story of heartache and glory, a story of heartache and glory. On the day of Ashura, in the land of Karbala, Imam al-Hussein had lost all of his friends, all of his companions. All of them had gone one by one, sacrificing their lives for Imam al-Hussein. Imam al-Hussein would walk between their bodies on the day of Ashura, calling their names after they've fallen, saying Burayr, Zuhair, Habib, Muslim. Why is it that I call you and you don't respond? Al-Imam al-Hussein had lost all of his friends, all of his companions, and now all that was left were his sons, his brothers, his nephews, 17 men from Banu Hashim. The first amongst them would be Ali al-Akbar, his son Ali, who would go and give his life for Imam al-Hussein. Brothers and sisters, on the day of Ashura, Imam al-Hussein would give his sons, would give his nephews, the sons of his brother Imam al-Hassan would go forward, Al-Qasim would go forward. After Ali al-Akbar had fallen, after he had called out for Imam al-Hussein, saying to him, Father, Father Hussein, I see my grandfather now handing me a cup from paradise. After Ali al-Akbar would fall, and Imam al-Hussein would answer him, Ya Ali, oh Ali, what is life after you? The nephews of Imam al-Hussein would go forward, giving their lives for the Imam. Al-Qasim would go forward, telling the Imam, to die with you, Ya Mawlai, to die with you is sweeter than honey to me. Imam al-Hussein would see all of them go and give their lives until his brothers and the brothers of Al-Abbas would go forward and give their lives, the sons of al-Banin, and no one who was left other than Qamar Bani Hashim, Al-Abbas. Al-Abbas would go to Imam al-Hussein, telling him, Mawlai, my master Hussein, give me permission to go into the battlefield. But Imam al-Hussein would tell him, Abbas, you're all I have left. Al-Abbas would then tell him, just let me go and get some water for the women and the children. Sukaina keeps calling me, asking me for some water. Al-Abbas, with the permission of Imam al-Hussein, would go to the Euphrates River. And Al-Abbas would dip his hands in the water, and he would refuse to drink, remembering the thirst of Imam al-Hussein. Al-Abbas would fill the satchel of water. He would go back on his horse. He would try to get back to the camp of Imam al-Hussein, fighting through all the enemies. But the enemies who would finally come from behind Al-Abbas, one coming from the right, cutting the right arm of Al-Abbas. Abbas continues to fight. The next one would come from the left side as the enemies are attacking Al-Abbas, and he would come from the left side and cut the left arm of Al-Abbas. Al-Abbas is still trying to hold on. What is he trying to hold on to? The satchel of water that is strapped around his chest. Al-Abbas is then showered with the arrows from the enemies of Allah. They say an arrow would hit Al-Abbas in his chest, an arrow would hit him in his face, but the arrow that broke Al-Abbas's heart was the arrow that would strike the satchel of water. And then the enemies would come around Al-Abbas and strike him with metal poles until he would fall on the sands of Karbala. And Al-Abbas, for the very first time, would call out saying, Akhi Hussein, my brother Hussein.
They say Imam al-Hussein would rush towards Al-Abbas. The enemies would flee. And as Imam al-Hussein would see the state of Al-Abbas that he was in, he would take slow steps towards Al-Abbas. Al-Abbas would hear the steps. He didn't see who was coming. Al-Abbas was covered in blood. He could not see. He hears the steps and he says, "Oh man who comes towards me, give me a few moments so that I may see my brother Hussein before you kill me." And Imam al-Hussein tells him, "Abbas, it is me, it is Hussein." And Imam al-Hussein holds al-Abbas in his lap. Al-Abbas tells him, "Brother Hussein, wipe the blood from my eyes, as I have no arms to wipe the blood from my eyes." Imam al-Hussein tries to comfort al-Abbas in his last moments. They say Imam al-Hussein places al-Abbas's head in his lap. Al-Abbas removes his head. And Imam al-Hussein brings it once again into his lap, but Al-Abbas removes his head. 3 times Al-Abbas would do this. And Imam al-Hussein tells him, "Akhi Abbas, why don't you let me comfort you?" He tells him, "Ya Aba Abdullah, who will comfort you in your last moments? Who will hold your head, Ya Hussein?" Imam al-Hussein tells him, "Abbas, let me take you back to the camp. Let me take you back." He tells him, "No, leave me here. I can't go back to the women and the children without the water. Please leave me here." And in those last moments, when the soul of Al-Abbas would finally depart, Al-Imam al-Hussein would look to the heavens and he would say, "Al-an inkasara dhahri," and now my back is broken. وحسينا وحسينا وحسينا. Call with me. وحسينا. All together. وحسينا وحسينا. One more time. وحسينا وحسينا. إنا لله وإنا إليه راجعون وسيعلم الذين ظلموا أي منقلب ينقلبون والعاقبة للمتقين. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to accept the little that we offer in His way. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to accept these tears, to accept this grief. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala by the right of Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam, by the right of Abu Fadl al-Abbas alayhi salam, to answer all of our prayers. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to heal our sick. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to protect our families here and abroad. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to remove the injustice and oppression from all of our brothers and sisters in Palestine, in South Lebanon, across the world, Ya Allah, in Afghanistan, Ya Allah. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to protect us through the reappearance of our 12th holy Imam, Imam al-Hujjah, Ajalallahu ta'ala farajahu al-Sharif. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to extend His mercy and the blessings of this majlis upon all of our marhumin. بحق محمد وآل محمد. Let's recite Surah Al-Fatiha for all of the marhumin of those who made this majlis possible and all of the marhumin of the believers. بعد الصلاة على محمد وآل محمد. اللهم صل على محمد. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله.
سبحان الله والحمد لله ولا إله إلا الله والله أكبر ولله الحمد. الله أكبر.